Leprechaun on the Loose by Marcia Thornton Jones, illustrated by Sid Moore. A leprechaun was loose in the classroom, and Sydney was the only one who knew it. Sydney saw 20 tiny green footprints on the floor. He followed them to the table where Mrs. Yoder had cupcakes for their St. Patrick's Day party. Sydney peeked inside the box. All the green icing had been licked off the cupcakes. So there's the cupcakes. There's the footprints. Sydney set out to find that leprechaun. It was plain bad luck when he stepped on his own shoelace. Oof! Whoosh! Splat! Sydney fell right on the table. Sydney ruined our party snack, Della Puddington told everyone when Mrs. Yoder threw away the squished box. I didn't do it, Sydney said. It was the leprechaun. An itty-bitty hee came from behind the fish tank, but Sydney was the only one who heard it. During reading time, Sydney noticed something was wrong with the fish. He sneaked to the back of the room and looked into the tank. The leprechaun was swimming the backstroke, and the fish definitely were not happy. There he is, swimming in the tank, and there's the fish. Sydney dove after the leprechaun. Plop, kerplunk, sploosh! Water soaked the table. Sydney ruined our decorations, Della cried when Mrs. Yoder threw away the soggy paper shamrocks. I didn't do it, Sydney said. It was the leprechaun. Sydney was sure he heard a tiny little ha-ha-ha as he mopped up the mess. During science class, Sydney heard a creak, creak, creak coming from the hamster's cage. Sydney tiptoed to the cage. He carefully opened the door and came face to face with the leprechaun. While Sydney and the leprechaun stared at each other, the hamster ran out of the open door and across the table. There's the hamster. He got away. Sydney dived after the hamster. Boom! Bam! Crash! Sydney fell against the table. Juice went everywhere, just as the hamster scurried out of sight. So there's the leprechaun, and there's the hamster scurrying away. Our juice is gone, Della said with a sniffle. So are the decorations and all of the cupcakes. Sydney ruined our St. Patrick's Day party. Sydney was sure he heard a faint tee-hee from behind the stack of reading books. There he is. Nobody believed that Sydney didn't do it. There was only one thing for him to do. He had to catch that leprechaun. At recess, Sydney sneaked past his teacher and ran to the art corner. Everything he needed was there. Sydney pounded and snapped and glued. Perfect, he said when he finished his leprechaun trap. Then he hurried into the lunchroom and looked through the lunch trays until he found a stinky tidbit of corned beef. So he's built a trap. He's putting some stinky corned beef in there. Sydney carefully reached inside his leprechaun trap with the bait. Just then, his foot knocked into the back of the trap. Swish, clang, zing! Sydney was caught inside the trap. He heard the tippity-tap-tippy of itty-bitty boots. I do believe I've caught me a box, that I have, said the leprechaun with a grin. Let me out, Sydney begged. The tiny man scratched under his tall green hat. Now why should I be wanting to do a thing such as that? So there's the leprechaun, and there he is inside the box. Sydney thought fast. Come closer, and I'll tell you a secret, he said. Secret? I love secrets, said the leprechaun as he inched forwards. That's when Sydney made his move. He reached out and tickled the leprechaun right under the chin. Hee hee, ho ho ho. The leprechaun fell down and hit the trap door. The door flew open. Sydney rolled out and pushed the leprechaun inside. Swish, clang, zing! I've got you, Sydney yelled. Now I can prove that you ruined the party and not me. Party, said the little man. I'll make you a deal. Let me go and I'll save the party. Then I'll be gone and you'll never see me again. How can a leprechaun save our party? Sydney asked. With me treasure, of course. Should he keep the leprechaun and prove he didn't ruin everything? Sydney wondered. Or should he let the leprechaun go and save the party for all his friends? Sydney was running out of time. His class was right outside the door. He had to decide. Quick, tell me where your treasure is, Sydney said. He leaned close and the leprechaun whispered in his ear. Sydney knew a deal was a deal. He opened the trap door and watched the leprechaun climb out. The leprechaun turned one last time and tipped his hat at Sydney. Then the teeny tiny man slipped out the window and was gone. Sydney found the treasure right where the leprechaun said it would be. It was just what he needed to save the party. So there's the treasure. It's all a bunch of treats. The class cheered. Even Della Puddington smiled at Sydney. Mrs. Yoder wasn't mad at him anymore, even if she didn't quite believe where Sydney got the party supplies. Sydney was finally able to forget all of the trouble the leprechaun had caused. Then Sydney heard something terrible. Excuse me, lad, said a tiny voice from behind Sydney's box of crayons. I'm looking for me brother. Have you seen him anywhere? So now there's another leprechaun. It's his brother. So our craft today is to make our very own leprechaun head. So if you wanted to, you could make this into a mask with an elastic or a string, but I'm just making it as a decoration. So I started with plate, so just the cheaper thin paper plate. And I've painted the outside of it orange, so you can color it with crayons or markers. I've used just poster paint. And the next step is to print a face. So just on our printer that we have here, on regular paper, I took a picture that I had off my camera and I printed it very large. So you can use a picture that you have developed at home, you can print one, or you can draw a face as well. If you can't print a picture, just draw a face on a piece of paper. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that out so that we can add it to the center of his beard. His hair and his beard are bright orange. So I'm just going to roughly cut around the outside of my picture. So they always look a little more leprechaunish once you cut them out and you cut their chin underneath. So I'm going to attach that onto the center of my plate with some glue. And then I'm going to add a hat. So at the top of his head, I have a hat. So I've just taken some green construction paper and cut out a half circle with 2 corners for the brim of his hat. And I'm going to add that onto my picture. So I'm just going to attach it right at the top of his hair. So I'm going to put some glue on my page, or on my plate. Add my hat. So there's my hat. And then across the top of my hat, just the decorations, so it makes it look more like a hat. I'm going to have a black strip, which would be the band around the hat. So I have that cut out, and I'm just going to measure it roughly for my hat. And I'm going to add that. And then also on the hat is a buckle, which would be the buckle that keeps the band on the hat. So I've just cut out a square, and then in that square I have a couple of slits, and I'm just gonna cut out those slits to make a rectangle inside of my buckle. And then I'm just gonna add that on top of my band, and it's gonna make it look like the buckle on the hat band. And then around the outside of my leprechaun, I'm just going to use my scissors, and I'm going to go around and I'm going to cut in towards the center to make it look like his fuzzy hair and his fuzzy beard. So I'm just going to do that all the way around my plate. If you want it to look more wiry, you can do smaller cuts around the plate. And then I'm just going to take my hands and I'm going to fold those and separate them and crunch them up a little. Make it look like it's a wild and crazy leprechaun beard. So then if you want to make it into a mask, you can do that as well. Just do a string or an elastic around the back, or you can just use it as a decoration for St. Patrick's Day. So this is my leprechaun, and his name is Ryan.